So, welcome everyone to Leading with Empathy and Allyship. This is a live event and podcast series. So each week we meet your host, Melinda Briana Epler, founder and CEO of Change Catalyst, where we build inclusive innovation through training, consulting, and events. In this series, we go deep and get real. We build empathy and explore tangible, actionable steps that we can all take to be better allies and better advocates for each other. So a few logistics here is we have a new link for Zoom. It's this link every week. So thank you all for for bearing with us in the transitions as we moved over to a new platform. I suspect people will be joining a bit late as a result because we have a new system. So thanks for bearing with us. You can go to our website and add it directly to your calendar at changecatalyst.co/allyship series. And because it's the same link, the calendar shouldn't change. So today we're talking with KR Liu, head of brand accessibility at Google. I'm really excited to have this conversation. Welcome, KR.
Oh, thank you, Melinda. It's great to be here, and thank you for having me.
Yeah. So let me just go over a few more logistics, and then we'll jump right in. So on screen we have an ASL interpreter, Kalina, and our interpreters are sponsored by Interpreter Now, which is a deaf-owned company, super amazing company. We're incredibly honored to partner with them. This is also being live captioned by Maggie at White Coat Captioning. So if you want to turn on captioning, just go to the bottom of your screen and you can click on closed caption, and then Maggie is behind the scenes typing away. Thank you to our team, Renzo, Sally, Antonia, and Juliet. Among other things, they will be monitoring the chat in the Q&A during our time. And just, I said earlier, we have a code of conduct, just as everybody has been amazing so far. So just be radically inclusive in your comments. And please do use the comment feature. Love to hear what you're thinking about, any aha moments, any just ideas you have, and then use the Q&A down at the bottom of your screen. We'll definitely have time for Q&A. We'll leave time for Q&A today. So if you have questions, please put in the Q&A so we can find them easily. All right, so let's dive in. So KR, can you tell us about your journey, how you came to do what you do today?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's KR Liu. My pronouns are she and her. I have short blonde hair. I'm wearing a black hooded sweatshirt, and I am a white female. And how I came about to do what I do, honestly, came by just not something I was planning. I grew up all my life having severe hearing loss, and I ended up entering Silicon Valley at a very young age, at 17, just by chance, many years ago, over 2 decades ago. And through my journey in my first 10 years of my career, I did not tell anyone that I had a hearing loss. I hid my hearing aids, I wore my hair long, and I'm an excellent lip reader, which is how I communicate. And so I was able to get by and not really have anyone know that I had a hearing loss. And the reason I hid that was in my very first job, I worked in tech support and I had to talk on the phone. And I asked the company, can I have the company buy me an amplification headset so I could hear on the phone? And they said, no, you will have to pay for that yourself. And so at the time, I didn't know that I had rights. I didn't know anything about the APA. I didn't know
that was illegal.
I could push for something that was actually something they should have provided for me. So anyways, I was really young, so I went home and I told my mom I need to borrow $500 for this headset so I could do my job. And so that right there made me think, oh, I can't talk about my disability. So it's just not going to be accepted. They're not going to support me. So I just kind of have to figure it out. And ironically, it was for a video conferencing hardware company back on dial-up. And the reason I joined the company is because I thought it would be really cool to be able to see people when you're talking to them on the screen. Of course, the audio comes in like 10 minutes later because the bandwidth hadn't caught up then. But anyways, fast forward to 10 years later, I had an incident where my hearing aids broke at work, and I took a quick break from work, went to my audiologist, and they said, I'm sorry, you need new hearing aids. and that's $3,000. And I did not have that kind of money. And I had to decide between getting hearing aids and paying my rent. And I just couldn't understand, like, why is something like this so expensive, not covered by insurance? And I just broke down and I had a brick wall moment where I was like, wow, I'm going to have to go back to work and tell them what's going on because they need to know that I can't do my job right now. And that forced me to have my kind of disability coming out moment. And my surprise was they were very supportive. They said, we absolutely would have stood by you, supported you, we will help you, and please let us know what you need. But at that moment, my boss at the time, she said, you need to go do something about hearing aids not being affordable. And at the time I laughed at her. I said, who's going to listen to some young 20-something-year-old woman in tech about how, hearing aids need to be more affordable? She said, just promise me you'll keep telling your story. So I did. I kept telling my story and I kept pushing for innovation in the companies that I worked at that were actually working in audio. And that led to a moment where I had that opportunity to go lobby on Capitol Hill and push for new legislation with Senator Warren's team called the Over-the-Counter Hearing Aid Act of 2017, which was signed into law that same year. And that just goes to show, from someone who worked in tech support in the front lines, to go lobby on Capitol Hill and push for technology that now is going to allow hearing to be accessible to millions of people. Your voice matters and your story matters, and people connect with that. And that led me to where I am now at Google, where I'm the head of brand accessibility, and I help bring a disabled lens to the stories that we tell, so that there is more authentic representation of people with disabilities out in the world. Right now, disability is represented less than 2% in the media and in entertainment, and even less do we have people with disabilities working behind the camera to tell those stories. So that is my role, and that's how I ended up where I am today.
Awesome. I knew some of your story, but you told different pieces of it today that I didn't hear. So that's awesome. Thank you. So can you talk a little bit more about what your current work entails? What does that look like? I think for some people in the audience listening to the podcast or listening live today, just even talking about what accessibility is and like at a deep level would be helpful.
Yeah, I think accessibility means many different things, but from, an experience level, it means that anyone, no matter their disability, whether they're blind, low vision, deaf, hard of hearing, or even have a hidden disability, which are things like cognitive disabilities, mental health, things like that, that you're able to experience or understand what is happening in the moment, and providing a inclusive experience. But on top of that, what's really important is that people see themselves in that experience, that they can relate to the conversation that's happening. And that's really important, right? Is not just having an inclusive experience or being able to understand what's happening, but to hear someone that they can relate to that is going through what they are going through. That is experiencing something in life that them or someone they know or friend or family member is going through. 1 in 4 people in the world have a disability, and disability isn't just permanent, right? Disability can be temporary. You can, scratch your eye, you can't wear your contact lenses for a period of time, you can't see. That's a temporary disability. Or a situational disability, you can end up somewhere like you are carrying a bag of groceries and holding a baby in one arm and you're trying to open your front door and you can't. That is a situational disability. So disability is something that all of us experience at some point in our lives. But doing the things that we can with the disability community to make the world more inclusive, because the world is not built for us. We've had to continue to advocate and fight for making the world more inclusive and include us. And that includes especially in technology, bringing voices of disabled people to the table when you're building innovation, and then bringing voices of the community to the table when you're telling their story. And those are 2 really key important things that I push for and I do every day. And that also means that when you get into those positions, that you bring people with you, right? As you finally you have a responsibility that when you get into those roles where you have a position of influence, don't forget to bring the community along, right? Because we have an unemployment rate that is extremely high. And because of COVID, right, it's even higher. So we need to think about how do we open the door and honestly remove the door for disabled people to be able to work in the areas that they love, whether it's product development or whether you're a creator and you want to tell stories and you're a producer or a director. And you want to be able to have that ability to influence the story. That's important too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to, you said a lot of things, including the unemployment rate is high. And I think the other piece of it is that the employment rate is low. And, that means that, so in 2019, and I'm using the stat off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure it's right because I looked it up recently. In 2019 in the United States, only 19% of people with disabilities were employed.
That's correct.
So the unemployment rate is about double the population, but it doesn't really paint the bigger picture of people with disabilities have taken themselves out of the workforce entirely.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you add other dimensions of who we are, not just, when you look at race and gender or sexual orientation, I identify as a queer disabled woman. When you look at those different lenses, for example, queer disabled people are 38% more unemployed than non-disabled queer people. So when you start to add the different dimensions and layers of who people are and those barriers, it's even worse. So those are things we also have to think about when we're looking at representation too, is all the intersections of who we are and all the dimensions of who we are.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that intersectionality. I think, a lot of people, when they think about somebody who's disabled or has somebody with a disability, they often think about one type of person. But the reality is that people with disabilities are just as diverse as the global population. And you hold intersectional identities as well. Yeah, why is it so important to focus on intersectionality when we're talking about disability, and particularly disability advocacy? I think is right now in this moment in time, 2020, there's a lot kind of coming to light.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that's really important to look at is let's take the COVID situation, for example, and how hard that has hit the disability community, but also all the issues around COVID. And how that can impact you if you're a different race or a different gender, different sexual orientation. That's why intersectionality is so important to bring to the disabled community, because the perception has typically been, or the stereotype is, that disability is only older white people in a wheelchair. That's the stereotype of what disability is or looks like, and that is absolutely not representative of who we are. And so we really need to use this moment in time where more people than ever are identifying as having a disability because of COVID. And I'll give you an example of that is if you have heart disease, lung disease, high blood pressure, hypertension, cancer, diabetes, you're at risk of COVID, but all of those things are disabilities. And so that impacts every age, every gender, every race, and in some races more so. And so people for the first time are identifying as having a disability because they're seeing it in front of them and the impact that it's having. So that's why it's important to show the intersectionality of disability, especially in this moment in time, because many more of us are being impacted by it, are more vulnerable than ever. But if we can start to use this moment to normalize disability, not have it be something that you're ashamed of or have to hide, that will help a lot of us, move forward and get through this, because it's going to be a long road. And I don't want people to feel like there aren't others like them out there that aren't dealing with the same issue, right? All of us are going through some type of stress or anxiety or worry right now. And that's something we need to address. And so if we can see more of ourselves out there and know we have a support system and know we have people who are that we can talk to, that we can lean on, that can understand, that's why this conversation is so important.
Yeah. And I think in addition, also, when we are talking about Black Lives Matter, and the Black Lives Matter movement and really working to create change, I think it's also important in that intersectionality to think about Black disabled lives as well.
Absolutely. I mean, there's some, even for me, I learned through this whole movement and talking to my community and better understanding, 50% of people who are killed by the police are Black and have a disability, right? That's just sad, shocking statistic, but that's something we need to pay attention to, right? We need to be addressing that. We need to better understand how can we better support people with disabilities, people with mental health issues. Like, those are ways that we can come together and really learn from each other and really support each other. So all of this has just amplified disability in one way or another, but now is the time to take this moment and really see what we can do to change it in a more empowering, positive light, right? Not make it about empathy. Empathy is important, understanding is important, but if anything, we don't want people to feel sorry for us. If anything, we want people to feel empowered by us on what we have been able to achieve. And that's really, really important, is people understand the contribution that disabled people have made to society. And many of those contributions, all of us benefit from. And many of us use those technologies and innovations today. I'll give a great example, is text messaging. Who can live without text messaging? Probably no one. But when mobile first came out, text messaging was created for the deaf and hard of hearing community so that they could communicate. But all of us use that today. And those features were created by deaf and hard of hearing innovators and engineers. And those are contributions that have been made in many different ways that people just don't know about. So if anything, we need to also respect the disability community and what we bring to the table.
Yeah, 100%. So we talked about COVID-19 a bit, and Black Lives Matter and racial justice. I think there's a third component that's happening in 2020 around the workplace as well. And I see so many people with disabilities saying, okay, finally y'all said that you have decided that remote work is okay. Like, we've been fighting for years, and finally, like, now that it's happening to everybody, it's okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like you said, so many people with disabilities it may be really challenging for them just to leave their home, to travel to a workplace or get to a workplace, and it's not very accessible. The ability to remotely work changes the game. And it's something the disability community has asked for forever. But, the perception was that you can't be effective working from home. And then we have COVID and shelter in place, and everyone's working from home. And if anything, people started to learn from how people with disabilities have been basically living like this for a long time and utilizing the skills and the tools and the things that we've learned to implement it into the workplace now. And it's an absolute positive thing that it's shown that you can be effective and work from home. So my hope is that this really opens the door to allow more and more remote work and employ more and more disabled people, because there is a huge pipeline of talent out there that needs to be utilized, that needs to be tapped into. And people with disabilities deserve those opportunities just as much as everyone else. But it's also a moment now in the workplace where we really need to take a look and reevaluate our workplace and make sure that we are truly an accessible place to work. And ask our community, ask disabled people who work in your company. If you don't have disabled people working in your company, that should tell you something too. But also ask us. We are experts. We have information and life knowledge skills that we've used throughout this journey that we would be happy to share. So if anything, don't be afraid to ask, right? I think there's a fear in asking the wrong way or saying the wrong thing or offending us. If anything, we're here to help. We're here to help you make the workplace more inclusive for everyone.
Yeah, so let's dive into, there's a question that I think we addressed with Tiffany Yu in episode 5, but I think it's worth addressing again. So people with disabilities, disabled, language, first off, I guess, in terms of asking, what do you prefer? How do you talk about it? And then And then maybe we could go a little bit into person first versus identity first language.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm of the idea of it shouldn't be something you should hire or be ashamed of. So disabled or non-disabled are the ways that I refer to it. So I am a disabled woman, right? And that is a huge part of who I am, and it's a part of my identity. I'm very proud of it. Some people may not feel comfortable identifying that way. So I always tell people the best thing to do is ask how they want to be identified. And if they're comfortable doing so. And they may say no, and that's fine, right? But people with disabilities kind of like puts us in my opinion, a separate box where disability is just one dimension of who we are. So I tend to lean more towards disabled people or non-disabled, is what I push for is more the norm of the lexicon we want to use. But everyone actually has a different preference. No disability is the same, no person is the same. So I always encourage people to ask first how they are comfortable being identified.
Awesome. Yeah, and I've noticed globally it changes too. You know, every person is unique, and also different regions. People tend to prefer a different language too. So
Right, absolutely.
yeah. Rule number one is don't assume.
Exactly. To ask either, because if you don't ask, you'll never know, right? And you may every now and then get someone who doesn't want to answer, and don't let that discourage you, right? I really encourage people to please keep asking. And educate yourself as best you can.
Yeah. And then I guess at you know, sometimes you can't ask, sometimes it's a global, you know, you just need to say people with disabilities or disabled people in your language. So I have learned, and I would love your thoughts too, that either one is okay, that nobody's going to fault you if you use one or the other.
Either one is okay. I just very much try to stay away from more ableist language, which is like, people of different abilities. Don't agree with that language. That's very ableist. It's not a bad thing to call out disability. If anything, we're trying to change that perception.
Yeah, yeah. And then of course, some really older terms that are still used. I still hear handicapped as well. Yeah. The differently abled, especially when you put the at the beginning. Yeah, those are the things that.
And it was interesting, this past July was the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And one campaign that we actually did at Google, which was really interesting, and we were able to take, you know, things that were trending on search at an all-time high, especially during now, and ableism was at an all-time high. People were searching for ableism and trying to understand what ableism was. And I thought that was really fascinating, because it goes to show me that people want to understand what is ableist, like what is the right language, or how can we change the way that we are talking about disabilities. So I found that like actually quite empowering and quite positive to see that people really were curious about what is ableist language, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you, Stephanie, for asking that question. And so let's dive into the ADA. Again, we talked about this a bit. If y'all want to learn more, go back to episode 5. We talked about this with Tiffany Yu as well. But what's the significance of this? Is the 30th anniversary. What's the significance of it? And from my understanding, the ADA gave basic important rights, but it was the beginning. Just the beginning, like the beginning of rights. And there's a lot more work to do.
Yeah, I mean, it was more about the physical barriers that were in the way for a lot of people, like no ramps, no curb cuts, no accessible bathrooms. Like there were a lot of physical barriers in the way. And the ADA was really the first piece of law that made disabled people have rights, right? We didn't have any rights. And so, yes, it's been 30 years, but what's interesting is we now live in a very digital world, and it is not accessible in a lot of ways. There's still a lot of work to be done. And so my job, honestly, is to like put myself out of work. If the world and the internet and the digital world is truly accessible to everyone, then great, and everyone sees themselves, great. My work is done, but we have a lot of work to do. we really need to start thinking about how do we make the digital world more accessible, because with remote learning, with remote working, all of that, right? We are recognizing that, wow, we really need to do some work here to truly make an inclusive experience for everyone, because there's a lot of places where there's no internet access even, right? So think about, sure, there are many kids who don't have access to an education right now because they don't have access to internet, they don't have access to computers. But imagine someone with a disability, if they finally did get those access to those things, the experience itself is still not accessible, or they have old laptops with no cameras, so they can't see people. There's just so many barriers there that we have to start focusing on. And I definitely see the passion behind these companies really trying to step that up and really create real change, because the ADA is just one part, right? That doesn't apply really deeply to digital times, but the movement is absolutely happening, where we're trying to see ways that, like, having interpreters and these types of, panel discussions, having captioning in real time, people describing how they look and allowing someone who's blind or low vision to understand what somebody looks like. Those are becoming common practice, and that's a great place to start.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's dive into that. And I have been doing some research on the ADA, and as I'm writing a book on allyship, and I have just learned how many advocates and activists worked really hard for many years to pass even that legislation, and also how many allies were there helping make that happen. And
yeah, I mean, people don't know that when Judy Heumann and many of those advocates were fighting and trying to shut down like the Capitol building, or were in Berkeley, like trying to like get the mayor to talk to them, that other groups came in to help and support them during those times. The Black Panthers came and helped to make sure they had food to eat, and had were able to be supported. I mean, this is where you can see the power of, like you said, allyship, of community, of coming together, because we need each other to help these movements continue forward. And people don't realize that. And even now, like you said, the Black Disabled Lives Matter movement is happening, along with the Black Lives Matter movement. So there's a lot of touch points across different groups right now, and we're actually coming together to help each other. So that's been really wonderful to see.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that allies can really do right now for people with disabilities?
If you're in a position of power, start to educate yourself and start to bring along people with disabilities into your teams, into your work, talk to the community. Many times, even myself, I'm in a position where I can be a voice for the disabled community, but I am not the only voice. So my responsibility is to bring others alongside with me, right? Is to bring other voices who have a different perspective that I just can't bring. I will never be able to bring a Black disability perspective. I have people I would bring alongside that. I would never be able to bring a trans disability perspective. I would bring other people on that. And so I think what leaders can do is start to look within their organization and start to think about, are there ways that we can engage the community in different parts of our company, our work, to make sure that we have equal representation, and not just in product development. Look at everything. People with disabilities work in finance, they work in HR, they work in the creative industry, they work in marketing, they work in all aspects, right? So think about, if there are holes in your organization where you don't have disabled people, take a look at why. And then start to create change, start to engage the community and figure out how to make it better. That is really my advice, is to start opening doors and then remove them once they're open.
I'm going to jump in. I have more questions, but I'm going to jump into a few questions because we have a lot actually. And for some reason, my Q&A function isn't working. So Antonia behind the scenes is passing them to me. So it is what it is. Hello, Zoom. So I think one question from Deborah, would you address the privilege of those that have an invisible disability and how to make inclusivity more achievable?
I don't know if it's a privilege to have a hidden disability. I mean, for example, hearing loss is a hidden disability. If I didn't tell you I had hearing loss or wore hearing aid, you wouldn't know I had hearing loss. But I think that's where the work really has to be done. Is some disabilities are very visible and very obvious, right? But a lot are not. And so we have to, like you said, Melinda, not assume and understand ways that we can better support people with hidden disabilities, whether it's mental health, cognitive, ADHD, ADD, I could go on, hearing loss, or even people are colorblind. You may not know they're colorblind. That's where we have a lot of work to do to figure out how do we incorporate as much disability representation as we can, not only in our work, but how we create our work. And that's where it's really important to bring those voices to the table to help understand what are ways that we can represent that. And it's not easy. It's not easy to figure out how to represent a hidden disability, but there are messages and tones and moments and ways to amplify that. And so I think that's the opportunity we have, is to speak up and talk about it more, and not have to hide it. I mean, ideally, in a perfect world, nobody should have to hide any identity of themselves or any part of who they are. And so, if anything, we should be speaking up more about it and not hiding it. And we have to figure out a place where people feel safe to truly belong, to truly bring all of themselves to their work and who they are and in their life. And by doing that, you have to be vulnerable. You have to be willing to put yourself out there, and that's not easy. But the more of us that do that, the more comfortable we make it for others to do so. So I think that's the first thing we can do, is to start talking about it, right? Is to start recognizing that you don't have to hide it. You shouldn't have to hide it. But in order to do that, you have to speak up about it. And that's not easy. I mean, it wasn't easy for me, but once I did, man, it felt like a weight came off of me. I felt really like, oh, it's okay. Like, why have I been hiding this for 10 years and causing myself so much stress and anxiety and depression? Getting that weight off of you is like so worth it in the end. But you have to continue to be vulnerable and be willing to do that.
Awesome. Awesome. Deborah, I see you have your hand raised. If we didn't address it in some way, please feel free to put something in the chat, and we can maybe circle back. Thanks for your question. So actually, Deborah had a second question, and maybe this is what she was hoping to address, which is those of us who have invisible disabilities, how can we work to make inclusivity more achievable? I don't know if there's anything in addition you might add, KR, in terms of
I think
the workplace.
Just those of us who do identify as having a hidden disability, is to talk about it more. And if there's hesitation as to why you're not comfortable talking about it, think about why and what would that take to change. And really engaging with others in other communities is really the first step you could take. Our community is so large and so open and so out there, especially on social media. There's many great advocates across different disabilities that you can reach out to or learn from. But that would be really my advice, is find a way to start engaging and talking about it.
Awesome. Andrew asks, we started a VIBE council. VIBE is value, inclusion, belonging, and equity, at work with several sub-teams: business practices, communications, community outreach, cultural awareness, and employee engagement, recruitment, retention, and development. I'm participating in the business practices sub-team. Any good book or other recommendations, other resources for corporate business practices that might recommend more effective best practices?
Yeah, one group I highly recommend is Andrea Levant. She has a consulting firm. Andrea Levant is the leader of the CRIP Impact campaign. So anyone who's seen the film CRIP Camp, they did a summer-long campaign with many different disability advocates to have conversations around the impact that CRIP Camp had on them and the ADA. She's a really amazing D&I Black disabled leader who's done a lot of work, interviewed President Obama on like 8830. She's really been an incredible thought leader on how to bring more inclusive practices, especially for Black disabled people, into the workplace. So that's one example, but there's so many. I mean, there actually are quite a few. But I'm happy to like send a list or something later of some resources that people can check out. But you'd be surprised. There's so many great books that have come out this year. Alice Wong has a Disability and Visibility. Julie Huming has Being Human. Sinead Burke, I believe her book just came out today. I mean, there's some really great books. It's been really great to see the movement of disability coming out. So yeah, there's some great books out there.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We'll add some links to our website and the podcast too. So to some of the books the resources that you mentioned. There's another one from an anonymous who asks, and I think you kind of addressed this, so it may just be a statement, a reminder, isn't the law just the first step? Yes. Don't we need to mainstream these ideas in popular culture and create a culture shift in how people with disabilities are perceived?
Absolutely. When you look at the influence of culture, especially pop culture and media and entertainment, that's one of the most visible places we can really start to create change. We're starting to see some of that in TV and film and shows. And I mean, Alice Wong was on the cover of Vogue UK this year. We're seeing more articles and things like Pop Sugar and Vogue and mainstream like culture around disability, not just like a New York Times article or opinion piece. No, there's definitely a shift there because people need to understand that people with disabilities care about all those things too. We love fashion and we love music and we love film and we love culture. And I'm a sneakerhead and I collect crazy amounts of sneakers. We have passions in those areas too. So when we can influence culture and start to show disability in those areas as well, absolutely, we can start to change people's perceptions.
Awesome. And then another question that, again, I think you kind of addressed, so it's more just a reminder, and maybe if you have any additional thoughts. Diversity and inclusion is a really valued concept, but people are often talking about race and gender. Disability is absent from the conversation. Yeah, I mean, we have worked really hard in the industry to really make sure, raise that conversation and the actions around this, because it's 100% agree. How can we make it more central when organizations are forming their D&I policies is what this person asks.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many ways to influence that within your companies, or for me, my role is to really influence that in our marketing org. When it comes to advertising or campaigns or storytelling or the ways that we represent even people who work at our company. Because the thing that's really frustrating is like we've seen this evolution in advertising, for example, where you see same-sex couples, you see interracial couples, but you still don't see disability. It's like, where is like the movement of including disability in advertising? And when you do see it, it's not really representative. And that's where we have a real opportunity, is to really create change there, but also internally within your organization. If you don't see disability within your organization, or it's not part of your D&I conversations or commitments, the things won't move forward for the disabled community. So you really have to bring them into your D&I practices. It's not just about race and gender. Disability touches all of that too. So we need to be parts of those main D&I conversations. And when you're putting together, your structure or the way the organization is going to represent that or create that change, disability has to be a part of that conversation. I mean, that does not need to be something that's separate or an afterthought. It's just as important as race and gender. And so that's a drumbeat that needs to keep going and be loud and really loud, because for some reason, disability tends to be an afterthought, and it's not. It's a really big part of your culture and your company and the world at large. So I highly, highly encourage D&I leaders to not forget disability in all the ways, because if you're addressing disability, you may also be addressing race and gender at the same time. So that's something to keep in mind.
So can you talk about what motivated you to be an advocate? What motivated you to really do this work?
Yeah, I kept waiting for someone to show up and be the person. All those years in my career, I'm like, okay, who's going to be like that thought leader, that person who's going to push that torch forward and that I could relate to or I could identify with. I kept not seeing it. And then eventually I met Jenny Leigh Fleury, who's the Chief Accessibility Officer of Microsoft and a dear friend and mentor. And she looked at me, she goes, "You're that person. You need to go be that person." And I was like, still shaking my head, like, who's going to listen to me, right? She goes, "No, you need to go be that person." So with a lot of support from different mentors, and early in my career, I was grateful that I really surrounded myself with amazing women of all different walks of life in their career who really guided me and pushed me to like get that confidence and that strength to like put myself out there. And it was really because I wasn't seeing anyone, and I really got pushed like forward. And then finally I was like fed up. I was like, fine, I'm just going to go do this because I'm not seeing the change I want to see. And I'm seeing my friends and my community being impacted. I'm not seeing things move forward. And I really wanted that. So I just, got driven to, right? I was just so driven and passionate about wanting people to be able to feel like they were equal members of society, that they could pursue any dream that they had. And these barriers would just be removed, right? And they wouldn't have to worry about disability being a barrier for them, so that they could really show their talent and really pursue what they love and not feel like because they had a disability, they can't, or people weren't going to treat them equally. And so that really motivated me, was like, I need to open these doors, not just for me, for millions. Because my story is just one story. There's many stories like mine. So I wanted to be able to see that change happen and that opportunity happen.
And as your journey to advocacy, like we all learn and we're always continuously learning. Like I'm sure you are, even in the work that you do 20, not 24 hours a day, well, maybe 24 hours a day, but the work that you do regularly. What do you think about when you think about being an ally, being an advocate for other people? What are some of the things that you're really thinking about?
Honestly, what I think about on a daily basis when I wake up is every day I have the power to influence someone's life, whether that's talking to them and inspiring them or giving them, strength when they're down, or opening a door, opportunity, or an introduction that could change their life, right? And that's what drives me. Every day that happens, right? I have a conversation. I always connect with people. Whoever wants to reach out, I will talk to them or introduce them to anyone. Those things really matter in someone's life. And knowing that whether it's part of my job, which it is, or just something I genuinely care about, I just really enjoyed that part of my life, is knowing that because I met someone or I knew someone or I was in a position where I can open an opportunity for someone, that changed their life, right? Or I helped someone have a different perspective, or I helped create a moment for someone where their voice could be heard. I mean, those are really powerful things. And sometimes we take that for granted as leaders, especially when we get into positions where we have a lot of influence, and we tend to forget that there were others that did that for us, right? And we need to remember that, people open the doors for us, so we need to carry that torch. Really, we really need to like open that door again and bring that chair to the table for them, because someone did it for us at some point, right? somebody made that connection or made that moment happen where it changed our lives to do what we love to do. And so that's what drives me every day, is knowing that I'm providing that moment for someone. And that's really, like, that's rare, right? That's rare that we see people who get into positions of success that they remember that they remember to look back and go, remember where you came from. Remember the challenges you faced and the no's you heard. And then eventually you got a yes, and you didn't get that yes by yourself. And so that empowers me every day, even when things are really hard, or you feel like the world is chaos, and it is. But you have to remember, you can't give up, right? You cannot give up, because there are people depending on you. And so that's a thing that fuels me as an advocate. You're always going to have that fight. You're always going to try to push things forward, even when it's really hard, but know that you will move things forward. Things will move forward. It just takes time. And you can't give up, because what if somebody gave up on you? Would you be where you are?
Yeah. And even if someone did give up on you, because I think a lot of people do go through that as well, I think still be there for somebody else so that doesn't happen to them, so that there is somebody there for them, and kind of change that cycle and disrupt that cycle. So if someone is in their workplace and is really wanting to be an ally, but they're just starting out and just kind of learning about the need to be an ally for people with disabilities, for disabled people, what would you recommend? Where would you recommend they start?
I would take a look at the organization you're in and look at where there's opportunities for that. That could be, do you have people with disabilities working in your workplace? Start there. Because if you do, great, go talk to them. Go learn from them. Understand, like, of course, do it in a very respectful way, but go have conversations, right? It always starts with just talking to people in the community. Understand what they're looking for, what would make things better. Where do they see a future where they feel truly included? Start there, and then look at opportunities within your organization where things are not accessible. Why is that? Everything from, it can be a company meeting, all hands meeting, and are there captions? Is there, when you make content, are there audio descriptions? Like, start there and being advocate to include those things if they're not. That goes a long way, especially with us all in a virtual world. I'm being on Zoom meetings or whatever video conference tool you use many, many, many hours a day. That's not easy sometimes for people with disabilities either. Like, that's cognitively exhausting. So, like, even be respectful of how many meetings you're setting a day for people. That would be a great ally right there. Just look at opportunities where there's holes and places you can fill those holes. And they can be small, but they can have a big impact. And if you don't have people with disabilities working in your organization, start asking why. Because there should be people with disabilities in every company, not just working on accessibility. They should be a part of your company doing whatever that may be, right? Because I really want us to move the unemployment rate. That is a really, really, really dire thing right now. And, people with disabilities want to work, and it's already tough, right? So any opportunity we have to change that percentage, we should be doing that.
Yeah, 100% agree. I do want to make a correction on something I said a little bit earlier. I think I said something like that people would just, when I talked about 19% are employed, I think I said something like people with disabilities have taken themselves out of the workforce, which I want to correct that because they have been forced by society to leave the workforce.
That's
correct. So I just want to be really clear about that.
Yeah. And there is a retention problem, right? I mean, it's one thing to get people with disabilities in the door, but setting up an environment for them to sustain and be successful long-term we also have work to do there, right? It's not just about getting them through that interview and getting them in the door and checking a box. Making sure that they are successful and have what they need to be successful long-term in an organization is really, really important.
Yeah, we talk a lot about covering and code switching as being a really difficult thing for people who are from underrepresented backgrounds. And what I have learned, especially in the deaf community, is that so many people are hiding their disability. They're hiding the fact that they're deaf. And I learned this just by literally asking people if they would speak at our events and finding no, people consistently saying no because they didn't want to be outed, basically.
Yeah.
And so I would imagine that a feeling of having to hide your identity on a regular basis would be really rough.
Yeah, but I mean, I will say, like, the first tech inclusion I ever did was the all deaf panel, and that was amazing, right? Because I was like, wow, somebody really wanted to give a platform to our community. More and more of that needs to happen, right? If that just became normalized, people would be like, okay, I can feel again, goes back to the normalization or just creating more of a platform for people to feel safe to speak out or be who they are is really like one of the biggest barriers we have work to do. Again, it goes back to like when you're in a position where you can create those stages and those platforms and you do that, that's really awesome.
Yeah. And that was me behind the scenes making that happen. And it was really hard. It was hard to build the trust to be able to, for people to know it was a safe space to do that. And that's what's required of allies, though, is sometimes it's difficult and it's really important. So just keep persevering. Yeah. And I think that, I continuously hear about this. We've done it a couple of times, and I continuously hear reference back to those few panels that we did. So where can people learn more about you if they want to learn more about you and your work?
I have a website if anyone wants to check it out. It's krliu.com. A lot of my like stories and journey are there. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. I think my Twitter is KRLiu_advocate. I keep my Instagram private. That's my puppy eye. If you want to see a bunch of puppy pictures, that's basically it. But that's where you can learn more about me. Awesome.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for this conversation.
Thank you for having it.
Yeah. Appreciate all you do, and
Likewise.
And appreciate you all with your great questions. As always, this has been, it's great to hear your questions and know kind of what you're thinking about, and adds to the conversation. So appreciate you all. So as many of you know, as I've said a couple of times, we've launched the next phase of our allyship research. So if we haven't done it already, we could really use your help if you would take a moment to go to fill out our allyship survey, which is changecatalyst.co/allyship survey. And we will, be using this, the answers that you give in our allyship report that will come out in a couple months. So it'll come out, be public, so that companies have a better understanding of how they can build allies internally, so that individuals can better understand what people want from allies. So thank you in advance if you've already done that, and thank you if you've already done that, and thank you in advance if you're going to do that. And Antonia has put the link there. So with that, join us each week for Leading with Empathy and Allyship. It's one link now, so once you've RSVP'd, you don't need to do it again, which is awesome. Please subscribe to the podcast on our YouTube channel. And if you wouldn't mind giving us a podcast review or a thumbs up on YouTube, that would be fantastic. And share this with friends and colleagues that could use this information. Thanks everyone for being here. Thanks, KR.
Thank you, Melinda. Thank you, everyone.